I came from Russia with my parents as a very small little girl. My parents came from Russia to Chicago, to America, because they had relatives in Chicago. My father's brother, his name was Israel, went with his family to Chicago, with his wife's family.
Yeah.
So that's why we got to Chicago. My father was here for 3 years before my mother came with 3 children, with Aaron, my brother Aaron, with me and with Sholem. We came from Russia. My mother had to come by herself because my uncle Israel did not send us a passport, a visa.
Right.
He didn't send us a visa.
I'm just closing the...
Oh, okay.
שלא יהיה רעש.
Okay. So then maybe I should go against the door. Wait a second.
No, just שלא יהיה רעש.
I thought maybe the sun isn't too
No, it's fine.
My father had 3 brothers. The oldest brother was called Israel. The second one was called David. And David came to America many years ago with his wife. And my uncle Israel sent him a visa. You had to get permission to come. You just couldn't come, just like that.
Right.
And my aunt, my uncle David's wife, missed her family, and she said, let's go back to Russia for a visit. And then the First World War broke out, and they never could get back. And my uncle, who sent them a visa, which cost a lot of money, was afraid if he would send my father a visa, what's called a visa. Visa is the permission to come. It's like a passport. It's permission to come, official permission. He thought if they gave it to him, maybe my mother would want to go back, and he would have spent a lot of money. So first he brought my father, and my father came to Chicago because of a very strange incident. My father, in Russia there was a big famine, a lot of hunger. People were dying of hunger after the First World War. And my father, everybody tried to find some business. And my father learned how to make soap. Imagine there wasn't anything in Russia at that time. A friend of his taught him how to make soap, but not the soap that we know, but soap for washing clothes. My father did that, and he and his partner sold the soap to the Russians, and that's how they lived. That was their parnasa. My grandfather was the Rav of the city, and he didn't have any money. He usually was supported by the people, gave him money so that he could live. But since everybody was poor and starving, my grandfather had nothing to live from. And my grandmother, who tried to sell things from place to place, she would take a sack of potatoes and sell it to someone and get a sack of kemach. And with the kemach she would make bread. But there was nothing to eat, and my grandmother died of typhoid. Typhus it's called. It's a typhoid disease. So my grandfather was left alone without parnasa, and my father was able to support the family and my aunt and uncle that were alive, a couple of them, was able to support them with the soap. And one day, my father's partner disappeared. He had taken the money that they had earned, and my father's suit, wedding suit. Remember, in those days there were no stores that sold clothes. So you had to go to a tailor to make. You had to bring the tailor had to bring your own material, and the tailor would make you a suit. And you wore the suit your whole life, because that's all you had. It was a lot of money, and that's all you have. So this partner stole the money that they had earned and took the suit and disappeared. So now the grandfather didn't have anything to live from. His children and my aunts and uncle that were in the house, they were about 25-year-olds or something like that. There were about 3 of them, I think. And my father wrote a letter to his brother in Chicago, his brother Israel, and said, please send me material for a suit. And my uncle wrote him a letter back, and he told him what happened. And my uncle answered him, I don't think I'm going to send you material. Come here to Chicago and you can make a suit here. And then he said he would send a visa, and he would send my father. And my father received official permission, that's called a visa, to come to America. But at that time in America, they did not allow everybody to come. They had what was called a quota. That is only a certain amount of people. They didn't want too many immigrants. So my father came on a special affidavit and visa that said he was a rabbi. And the rabbis were able to come in freely without being part of what was quota, which is the quota is like
I understood.
Okay.
Right.
So my father came through Germany. He went to Germany. He got another, and he had a smicha. He had an official document saying that he was a rabbi. He was. And he got another one in Germany and arrived in America and went from New York to Chicago. I don't know how he found Chicago, how he found my uncle. He didn't know English. He didn't know anything. I don't know how he got to him. But the truth is, he did, and he rented an apartment with another person. My father came as a shochet. He was a shochet for chickens. And he came to Chicago, and from that he was going to make a living. See? He wasn't going to make soap. He was just going to be a shochet and a rabbi. And then he came to my uncle, and my uncle helped him at first. And then later on, my father earned money, and he sent it to my mother, and sent it through a bank order, and my mother would take the money, and that's how she lived. Now, she lived in Pochep. The name of the city we lived was called Pochep. And one day there was a big epidemic of children died, some children's disease. So my mother took 3 children, packed them up in some suitcase, and went to Odessa. Odessa, where her sister lived. Odessa was warmer climate near the Black Sea, and the people there were not sick. There were no children's disease. So that's how my mother came and saved us from some kind of what disease, I don't know what it was. So that's how we came to Chicago, and we lived in what's called the West Side, which were Jewish neighborhood.
Wait, how did you get from Odessa to Chicago? Your father sent money.
I sent money, and my mother took the money and bought a ticket for a boat.
Okay.
But from Pochep, which was Russia, how did she manage to get to France, where the boat was Le Havre? The boat was stationed in France, in the port in France. in Haver, נדמה לי. I don't know how she got there. Remember, she didn't know any language, she didn't know any French, she didn't know anything, just Russian. How did she manage? I don't know.
How old were you?
I was about very small.
Do you remember this?
No, I don't remember anything. No, I don't know. I don't know. But I know that we got to Chicago somehow, and I know that it was about 3 years till my mother arrived with us, and the family where he lived, my father lived with people. He had a room in the house. Somebody had an apartment, and he had rented out a room. They rented a room to him, and that's where he stayed. And he had to find an apartment for us. He had to find a job. He had to find a place where he could be a shochet. And eventually he did. And we went to school. We learned the English, and we managed to live poorly, but we were alive. And at that time there was a lot of communism in Russia, and it was very bad, and very big famine, very big hunger in Russia. But in America,
What year?
I don't know, 26, 28, 30, those were years with a lot of hunger. It was after the Communist Party became powerful. There was no organization, and people didn't have anything to live from. It was after the war. It was very bad. So there we were saved. My mother saved us, because my mother thought that the best way to save the children was to feed them good. So my mother used to make special food for us, so that we would go, all three of us were very small and very thin. And that was the way she thought she could save us from getting disease like shachefet, and other diseases. And all the years my mother seemed to know about how to raise children, how to feed them, and we were all taken care of. We were very small, thin, but we were healthy that time. And once, and my mother used to cook 3 times, 4 times a day. She was always cooking, preparing for us the best food, so that we should not die from malnutrition, from being sick because we didn't have anything to eat. Okay? Once a nurse came to the house at lunchtime to teach my mother, who was called a Nola Chadasha. My mother was considered Nola Chadasha. And the nurse came because we were all such thin children. She teach my mother how to feed her children. And she walked in, and there was the table was full of food, and we were very good eaters. We ate a lot. We ate a lot. And she walked out. She didn't believe it, because she thought she was Nola Chadasha, doesn't know anything, and these poor little kids were hungry, she thought. But that was not the story. My mother fed us a lot, and good food. And all the money went for food that my father earned. The money went for food. We really didn't have much to wear. Very little. Same stuff. The same clothes. I think once a year I got a little dress. Once a year some kind of a cotton dress that was cheap. And that's how we lived. But all the money went for food. Okay, must be. עכשיו?
You wanted more? A little?
It's hard for me to talk. What else should I talk about? That we were good students.
Your high school years, your
we
study
went
years.
to high school in Chicago. We lived in a Jewish neighborhood. We went to Chicago, good high school, and we went to the library. We would walk miles to the library. And the school, we always lived near the school. There was always took an apartment near the school. But I always came late. Why? Because I was sitting eating all the time. And I told you what I did for
Yeah.
breakfast. But here, let's see wait a second, I want to hear this. Stop for a minute.